Hi, fourth graders. This is Miss Kovarik, and I'm here with lesson 24, which is called Features of a Fable. We don't have any vocab today, but I did want to go over these two words before we begin. So we're going to be learning about a fable today, and you probably have read fables before. If you've ever read The Tortoise and the Hare, or any of those other stories with talking animals that usually teach us something, those are called fables. So it's a story that usually involves animals. Usually those animals are talking, and the story is meant to teach us a lesson or a moral. And the second word is personification. And as you can see, we have the word person in here. Personification is when an author gives human characteristics to something that is not human. So for example, making animals talk is personification. It doesn't just have to be animals though, it could be trees or any other object that does not do things that a human does. So a pencil, a post-it, anything that's not a human, we're giving it human traits. We're making it have character traits. We're making it move and talk and walk. So we're going to read a fable today called The Crane and the Crab. Once upon a time, there lived a cunning crane. As a young bird, he had enjoyed his life in hunting fish by the pond. But recently, life had seemed drab. Every day was the same, stalking the pool, looking for movements under the water, pouncing for his prey. It was hard work and frustrating. More often than not, he would come up empty-beaked. It took most of the day to catch enough fish, and then the next day he had to begin all over again. The crane wanted a new life, one where he could spend his days lazing under the shade of the trees without having to lift a feather. If you remember, the crane was a cunning crane. Instead of daydreaming about his new life, he instead hatched a plan. The crane began to cultivate an air of sadness. He would stand by his pond, his beak drooping downward, balancing on his one leg. Every so often, he would heave a great sigh as if to say, "The world is a terrible place." One day, a crab scuttled by and saw the crane looking miserable as usual. "Why are you so sad?" asked the crab, who was a nice crab and always concerned about her fellow creatures. "My dear, I have heard the worst news, and I don't know what to do about it," the crane said, shaking his head from side to side. "I heard two fishermen talking not 20 feet from where we are standing. They plan to drain the pond. These humans are so greedy. They don't fish a little like I do. They want to take everything." "But this is terrible," said the crab. "What will my friends, the fishes, do? They will all die when the pond is drained. They don't like you much. No offense, Mr. Crane, but at least you don't kill them all at once." "I know," answered the crane, "but I fear that though I know a way out for the fishes, they will never trust me. I have eaten too many of them in the past. Alas, if only I had been a vegetarian crane." The crab sat and pondered a while, her claws waving gently. "I think perhaps it was fated that I meet you, Mr. Crane. I can talk to the fishes and persuade them to listen to your plan." The crab was as good as her word. Within a very short amount of time, fish began to bob up to the surface of the pond, including the king of the fishes himself. The crane's beak began to water, but he forced himself to remain calm. "The crab has told us the terrible news," said the king, "but he mentioned you had a plan, Mr. Crane." "Indeed I do, O king of fishes, renowned for your wisdom and the care for your people," replied Crane. "Higher up on those hills lies another larger pond. It has few fishes, which is why I have always hunted there." As the crane mentioned hunting, some of the more timid fishes began to dive back into the water in alarm, and it took a number of shouted commands from the king of the fishes to bring them back again. "I could carry you to that pond," continued the crane, as if nothing had happened. "That is, of course, if you would trust me." The fish didn't like that plan very much, but the king of the fishes was a good ruler and decided that it was worth the risk. "I will go first," he declared. Uh-oh. Sorry guys, I was missing a couple pages. So where I left off was, and if I do not return with the news of this pond, we will know the crane has tricked us. With that, the king of the fishes flung himself into the air, and the crane caught him neatly in his beak. Soaring up through the sky, the crane flew to the hills. Just as he said, a larger pond sat there, shaded by trees. The crane carefully deposited the king of the fishes into the pond and allowed him to swim for several minutes. Eventually, the king declared the new kingdom safe, and the crane carried him back to his subjects below. The fish rejoiced. They had been saved, and the crane had proved trustworthy. The next two fish hopped into the crane's beak to be carried off to the new pond. Or so they thought. For the crane had been waiting for this moment all along. He was, if you remember, a cunning crane. There had never been two fishermen waiting for this There had never been two fishermen or a plan to drain the pond. Instead of carrying the new fish to the pond in the hills, he took them to a rock. As they flopped on the rock surface, gasping, he ate them both in one big gulp. This, thought the crane, was the perfect plan. The fishes will think I'm helping them, and they'll never know the difference. I could eat every fish in the pond, and they will jump into my beak. The crane wasn't really hungry after those two fishes, but he was so smug about the success of his cunning plan that he wanted to see some more poor fish tricked. Meanwhile, the crab had been watching these proceedings with interest. She had, after all, brought the king of the fishes and the crane together. She decided to see the new pond for herself. After all, the fisherman would also destroy her home, and secretly the crab had always wanted to fly. So on his next trip, the crane obliged. He'd never eaten crab and thought it might be quite tasty. As he coasted toward the rock, though, the crab saw the bones of fish bleaching in the sun. With horror, she realized what the crane had done. "How could you?" exclaimed the crab. "You monster!" "Monster?" scoffed the crane. "I am a crane. Eating fish is what I do." This was merely a more efficient method. I experiment with new ideas all the time. For example, I think I may experiment now by eating crab, madame. But the crab was too quick. She normally didn't approve of violence, but her life was at risk, not to mention the other fish waiting for their trip. She reached out with her claws and gripped the crane's neck. Feeling the pinchers, the crane was suddenly very afraid. He was too scared to even gulp. "You will carry me back to the pond, Mr. Crane," the crab said in a soft, menacing voice, "and then you will fly away very, very fast. You will find another place to live, and if I ever hear of you playing such a trick again, you will find out just how sharp these claws are." The crane, feeling less cunning by the minute, did as the crab said. As soon as the crab was deposited on the ground, he flew away as fast as his wings could carry him. Meanwhile, the crabs scuttled back to the old pond and told the fish the sad news of their departed comrades. They mourned for many days and vowed never to trust a bird again. All right, so you have a couple multiple choice questions. Make sure that you're using evidence when you answer number 5, so find something from the text that supports your answer. And number 6 is another written response. It asks, how does the crane and the crab teach the reader the moral, don't be greedy? So how did this story teach the readers that it's not good to be greedy? And then the last one is another written response, and it asks, what is another moral that we can learn? So don't say don't be greedy, I already gave you that one. What is another one that we could learn from this story? All right, as always, make sure you use those Zoom hours. Go back in the text and find those answers. We're here if you need any help. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye, Adams.